Welcome back, everyone. It's very nice to have you here. In his essay, The Early History of Art Rock, Bruce Eder defines art rock as the music in which the bands are playing suites, not songs, borrowing riffs from Bach, Beethoven, and Wagner instead of Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley, and using language closer to William Blake or T.S. Eliot than to Carl Perkins or Willie Dixon. This definition points to a level of sophistication unseen in the prevailing rock genres of the 1960s. The term art is connected to a more sophisticated and aesthetically higher approach. In the musical universe, art music refers to classical music, but it also has an important connotation with rock music. Broadly speaking, it embodies an approach which breaks away from the standardized short verse and catchy chorus format idealized by the record companies of the 1950s and 1960s. This was accomplished primarily by the incorporation of traceable stylistic elements from classical music into rock music and the experimentation with electronically generated sounds. When we refer to art rock, we will mean music that bears such features, the most essential of which are rhythmic concepts and techniques from the classical avant-garde post-1900 music, such as odd time signatures, changing time signatures, polymeter, that is, the use of multiple independent rhythmic layers, and sudden tempo shifts, formal structures from classical music, vocal parts modeled on classical music genres, for example, the choir-like harmony singing in Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, instrumental virtuosity, experimentation with technology and electronically generated sounds, the prominence of keyboard instruments including piano, synthesizer and mellotron, lyrics that tend to be more poetic, the notion of the concept album, denoting an album that is devoted into a single concept and is viewed as a coherent whole, the usage of instruments from the symphony orchestra, and the integration of genres, namely rock and classical music, in a single work. This essentially refers to music that is intended for rock ensemble, or rock ensemble and symphonic ensemble, and or its formal design and internal elements, that is, the motivic thematic structure, harmony, relationships between key areas, relationships between sections, etc., are modeled on approaches and techniques of classical music composition. In reference to the last point, we should note that there is a considerable difference between the genuine integration of genres, rock and classical music, and the superficial reference to classical music features. Therefore, when a rock song quotes melodic segments from classical music, it is not art rock. The same goes when a classical melody is used as basis for a rock song. On the other hand, when a work is composed for a rock group, thus intended for rock instrumentation and texture, and classical ensemble, such as Deep Purple's Concerto for Group and Orchestra, the result is much more successful. Another example would be The Who's rock opera Tommy, a work written for rock ensemble where the form follows a central, akin to opera idea. Some of the most impressive achievements in art rock lie within these two categories. It is in the experimentations with longer and more sophisticated forms, the extended improvisations typical of psychedelic rock groups, and the exploration of new sounds that we find the earliest footprints of art rock. By the end of the decade, the characteristics of the genre were already more or less defined in the content of 4 pioneering albums. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club of 1967, a critically acclaimed concept album that features a more elaborate song structure, the occasional usage of a symphonic ensemble to perform avant-garde-like passages, and pioneering recording methods involving signal processing as a sound shaping tool. The Days of Future Past, also of 1967 by the Moody Blues, a song cycle album about a typical everyday, featuring a fully engaging symphony orchestra. Uncle Meat, released in 1969 by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, an album years ahead of its time. Zappa, the mastermind behind the album, showcases his thorough knowledge of avant-garde classical music as well as his skill in merging successfully various musical styles and genres in a single work. The album is meticulously worked out to feature layering and stratification detail typical of symphonic works. There is an unprecedented, in rock music, usage of orchestral percussion and wind instruments. Among the various techniques employed by Zappa, we note the timbral manipulation of orchestral instruments and the exploitation of electronically generated sounds used in the song We Can Shoot You, the lack of musical meter and rhythmic periodicity resulting in the replacement of rhythm with durations used in the song We Can Shoot You, structured musical chaos via the presence of multiple independent layers, we find this in 9 types of industrial pollution, and speeding up the track of previously recorded acoustic instruments. You may find this in the song The Uncle Meat Variations, and in The Court of the Crimson King, released in 1969 by King Crimson. According to Greg Morrison, the specific work set the parameters for progressive rock. Mystical and surreal lyrics, longish compositions with contrasting sections and tempo shifts, influences from classical, jazz and rock, precise playing, dramatic mood changes, and a striking image on the album cover. This is the end of this lecture.